Yo, so in their latest game against T1, G2 deployed a very interesting sort of drafting strategy. It was very clear that they came in with a very specific game plan surrounding this Nocturne B1. And they did a lot of setup, and G2 is a team that drafts very intentionally. You can kind of see it reflected in the draft. But why did it go so south? And I wanted to break down potentially why G2 went for this, the logic behind it, how it surrounds the meta, maybe potentially even the playstyle of T1, and maybe why it didn't actually pan out the way it sort of intended. So let's break down how it sort of happened, right? I've been seeing this a little bit from a couple of teams. I don't remember which one, but there was a couple of games where they also focused heavily on a Nocturne B1, and it didn't really pan out as well. But that was more so due to the fact of a lack of preparation, let's say. Because of the fact that this world's meta, I would say, is extremely responsive, right? My understanding is that, Nocturne, with being a sort of forward, full-encompassing, comp-defining sort of pick, and dealing with side laners a lot, it's something that, we wouldn't expect to be a B1. In my years of playing, it doesn't really seem to be something that's very common, and especially when you can draft against it, right? So it could be because of a mix of factors. G2, they do surround this with the first phase bans on blue side that allow them to basically get the leverage to do this. So you can kind of see it here. They ban out all the backwards champs, the Braum, the Renata, and I guess Kalista for the matchup spread, right? And then they lock in the Nocturne B1. What this does is essentially secure and blow all the resources so that the Nocturne can actually thrive and succeed in quote-unquote guarantee that it will do well, right? But however, even with that in mind, I do think it's a little bit hard for the Nocturnes to succeed. I think you can still pick enough champions elsewhere on the map and pick enough stuff that it kind of circumvents the Nocturne from succeeding. The logic behind it could be because recently in practice, this pick just exploded out of nowhere. These teams could have information that we don't, and maybe in scrims or something, it was disgustingly strong, and that's why G2 made this adaptation compared to before. Because before, they would not be like this sort of team. They would be very flexible and responsive and that sort of thing, right? And this is a very different change. You could argue that you could do this same type of draft and just vibe B1 as well, and it would arguably be more successful. But it could be due to the field of champs specifically that they feel that it could be strong. It could be namely a lot of the AD carries, although I would say things like Xayah still exist as well, that are like a traditional counter into things like the Vi. So I'm surprised that this is the logic behind it for them. Most teams will actually open with the Skarner or open with something more consistent like the Vi or the Jax or even things like Ashe. But Nocturne is quite the different shift, right? And you can kind of see it here. Even though G2, they ban accordingly and try to get themselves access to the backline, let's say, T1 still managed to come up with a comp that answers it. We need to talk a little bit about this Gragas and the Jax matchup because it also is a very traditional matchup, but this is exactly the case where it is a unique answer to address the needs of the meta. Right now, Jax has been pretty much going on a tear through this meta because even with his quote-unquote worst matchups, he still gets priority, right? Gragas into Jax is like a true matchup where Gragas actually can stabilize his matchup fairly well, and he's able to kind of create sort of an even matchup in a lane in a drafting meta where Jax is basically one of the most popular top laners because of this. And it forces a shift in the dynamic. So T1's comp is both well-rounded and it achieves the needs of countering this Nocturne. And they have a 4-5 that allows them to basically maximize their chances of addressing the Nocturne pick. With AD carry, yeah, you're a little shafted because especially with the Xayah ban, there's not really much you can really go for. It is what it is. But with what T1 do have, this is basically as good as you're going to get in terms of addressing this. So that's why even with the bans and the preparation, this meta could be a little bit hard for them to have this Nocturne succeed. And this is just the game plan they came with. So there was no there's not many contingencies they necessarily plan for. So this is basically what they thought was best against T1. It could be either they just think it's the best. They think it's the best against T1's playstyle specifically. It could be doing really well in scrims. There could be a lot of different factors that cause G2 to play like this, but it ended up not panning out. And you can kind of see it in game 2 as well. They do the same strategy, and they actually just adjust the ban to have a Skarner ban, and they do the same opener. It's a little bit, it's like a slight adjustment, but fundamentally, it's basically the same draft, just with a different jungler, because the Skarner was banned, and the G2 go even more forward, right? And even though T1 don't do anything special to kind of like address it, they pick essentially the same champions, right? It seems like it's been hard for this pick to really succeed. It could be because scrims tend to be more chaotic overall, and you know, a champion like Nocturne, with the pacing that he is able to outpace like most of the junglers because of his innate like clear speed and his ability to capitalize on enemy jungler mistakes, which is something to note. But when you're on stage, things tend to be a lot slower, and this could result in why like the outcome of G2's plan here didn't really pan out as much as they thought. So it's not a bad try per se, because you know, objectively G2 is a great drafting team. You know, they're one of the most flexible, they're very creative. So this could be just a small misread, and it did cost them a very important game. And hopefully, you know, I don't think the Nocturne will define the meta. I think the Nocturne will have a place in the meta, in my opinion, because if you catch people off guard and teams don't respect the pick, and especially like they pick a random jungler that doesn't really fare well against it, or they pick a comp that needs to be able to get side lanes, but the Nocturne can punish that really easily. I think these are two examples of where I could see the Nocturne really succeeding on 4-5, or you know, like if they all in, it's like a checkmate pick on b4 b5, or picking it on r4, and you're hedging against certain things, or you can essentially do it like that, right? You're preventing teams from doing certain comps, but with so many options available and so many ways to address it, I don't think it's really hard. Also, on the point with like counterpicking jungle, not a lot of teams are doing it right now, and like normally anyway, because of the fact that it's more of a facilitator role, and a lot of the champions that are good in the jungle most of the time are champions that are not, let's say, counterpicky, right? They are mainly champs that just kind of do everything, and then you just kind of pick them, you know? So Nocturne is like a more, let's say, specialized pick in that sense, and that's why I personally think it's pretty hard to really run. So hopefully that gave some insight to you guys, and yeah, I just wanted to break down the logic with that G2 basically put in this pick, and why it does and doesn't make sense at the same time. I do think it will see more play potentially, but I don't think it should have the priority that it has. So yeah, thanks guys.